Hey everyone, this is Dan Kamenstein. I've gotten a lot of great questions and feedback from all of you about the assessment component coming up for the end of the module, and also based on your experiences with the mid-module assessment. So I wanted to address a couple of these issues and just kind of give you some thoughts about where we are and where we're going with this, because I know you've all read lots and lots of emails, and I thought maybe just a quick 5-minute, hopefully only 5-minute video would be more efficient and hopefully more helpful than a 10-page email. So I'll start with this. So I do apologize. The schedule for when the mid-module and end-of-module evaluations did change a little bit just in terms of trying to get grades out in time. All of you should have access to the actual schedule in D2L, and I'm trying to keep this updated as much as possible. But you'll see we are now in week 9, and if you look down here in the afternoons, I'm trying to indicate when those assessments are occurring. So here for the afternoon sessions, that's when we're going to do the end of module assessments, is the afternoons for this week. And again, when we have mid-module assessments, I'm trying to put those on there as well. And I posted on the faculty channel and Teams, and I updated the document as well with the actual mid-module and end-of-module evaluations for every module. So again, I apologize. We did have to change things around to try to move up the end-of-module assessments so that we could get them in time, done in time to actually get the grade submitted. Otherwise, you would have been stuck with doing assessments and then having to turn the grades around within 24 hours, and we wanted to give people a little bit more time to do that. So I'll start with that. Some of the questions that have come up just in general about the assessment form I want to address. But before that, I want to just go back to the grade breakdown, just so everyone's seen this, and the students do have access to this as well. One of the big concerns as we combined the CBL format into the modules and assigned one single grade for the module rather than breaking it up into the traditional lecture-based material, the physical diagnosis PCL material, and the PBL, what was PBL or what's now CBL material, and having 3 grades. One of the concerns a lot of people raised going into this was that they didn't feel that CBL instructors could be trusted to really evaluate fairly. And so there was a lot of concern that we would, in CBL, us as facilitators, because we like the students and we want them to do well, we would give them pretty high marks. And it would cause students who may be on the borderline, who are struggling a little bit, to pass the module overall, even though they had done fairly poorly on the exam portions of this. So that was the concern going in. And that was originally why CBL was worth a fairly low percentage, somewhere in the order of 15% of the total overall grade. And myself and Dr. Winston and Dr. Tai advocated pretty strongly that if we were going to be 30% of the students' weekly interactions, that we should be up about 30% of the grade. And so we advocated pretty strongly because we felt that it was really important that the CBL faculty had a lot of input into the grades of the students, because they were the ones interacting with students in small group fashion and certainly seeing the students more than anyone else. So I would just kind of advocate for us that we are really a keystone to helping the students succeed, helping them to honestly assess where they are and the progress they need to be made. That means that one of the tasks and one of the things that was emphasized to all of us as CBL facilitators was that we had to be trying to assess the students as accurately as possible and identifying students who are struggling in CBL with the knowledge that that might mean if they were struggling in CBL, their grades might be low enough that if they were also struggling in the module, they might not pass the module. And that's a little bit of a different frame shift from what we normally have been in small group facilitators, where we've really just given them high marks because we think that overall they're nice people, and they all are nice people, and they're doing well. But we're really trying to be a lot more accurate about identifying who's doing really well and who's struggling. So just to remind us again of that, for the mid-module, the students self-assess, that's 1%. Our mid-module assessment is 4%. The student's self-assessment at the end of module is worth 3%. Our end of module faculty assessment is worth 15%. And then they have a problem-solving exam worth 10%. And so that total makes up the entire, so the 10 plus 15, so 25% there, plus another 5%. So that's about 33% of the grade for this module comes from all of the CBL activities. And that seems appropriate because about 30% of the coursework they're doing this semester or this module is in CBL. So we fought very hard to have that ability to really influence students' grade, because we felt that if CBL is worth 10%, they wouldn't spend and they wouldn't really invest the time in CBL. And there was a big concern that they're going to spend 6 hours and they're really not going to invest the time, and the faculty are going to invest a lot of time and they aren't going to see a lot for it because the students aren't going to value it because it's not valued in the grades. So that's why CBL is worth so much. So several of you raised concerns about 15% of the students' end of module grade being based on your assessment. The reason it is because you are in the best position to evaluate how well the students are doing. And so one way you could see this is it is a lot of extra work to really accurately assess the students, but it also gives you a lot more input to how your students are doing. So we're asking you to take that seriously and asking you to really be honest about where you think students are. In the end, just giving students who are struggling or lower performing students a really good grade because you like them, in the short run will help them, but in the long run will probably do them a significant disservice. Now, I'm speaking from personal experience. It definitely is hard when you feel like a group's doing well overall or students doing well overall to give them a lower grade. You just, by human nature, all of us want to see our students do well. So that brings me to the second component of this. And the second component is actually addressing what we had showed you several times during faculty development, is just the actual assessment form. So most of you I know looked at it, but probably when you were actually having to fill out grades and the students are having to fill out grades and looking at this a little more closely, you have some really good questions. So the first question that came up several times is, why are there so many things in some of these categories? And the answer to that is we were trying to give as much objective measurements as we could to a fairly subjective form. So many people were concerned about, as we move to more subjective grading, how do we know that we are actually accurately measuring people? So we tried to give a lot of bullet points and markers of how you can objectively look at where is a student. And we were particularly cognizant of this because several facilitators and several people expressed that they were a little bit concerned about how they would actually know where they're supposed to fit on this. And we were moving away from the purely CBO or competency-based model where we basically just said, here's the competency, where are they on 1 to 5? We wanted to give you a little bit more of what are the actions that we would expect. And so that's why some of these have several category or several bullet points to them. So I know it makes it a little onerous, but we're really trying to give you a lot more resources of these are the things we expect. So if a student says, well, I thought I should be here and you're putting me here, you could go through those bullet points with the students together and say, okay, this is where I see you when it comes to these things, how well prepared you are for the session. How do you compose yourself? Do you get impatient during the session or not? And are you participating in discussion? Are you responding to the challenges? If someone challenges you, how are you responding? So you could walk through these things and say, this is how I see you in these. Now, I chose one that's particularly long on purpose. We have several CBOs that are covered by this one thing. And the other option we thought about was actually breaking professionalism into 4 or 5 subcategories. So we could have had 4A, B, C, D, and you could have ranked people on all of those. So we could make each of these bullet points a separate question. The concern was we were already getting to 11 different things you had to fill out and comment on. We thought that if we made a 40 question document that many people would find that onerous. And so yes, there are a lot, but if I break 10 into 10A and 10B, 10C, 10D, 10E, 10F, that's a lot more checkboxes you have to fill out. So we were hoping to minimize the amount of different checkboxes you had to complete while also maximizing the input that you had and the feedback that you gave to the students. So that's kind of how we did that. Again, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, and certainly people are concerned about this a little bit in terms of the number of different things, but that was our initial thought. The other question that's come up a lot, which I think is also a really good one, is, okay, well, the students they meet some of these categories and some of these categories. I just don't understand. And what we're asking you to do is be honest about where do you think, if you think they're excelling and doing really well, but really their handouts aren't perfect, but they're really excelling in everything else, you might decide to give them a higher mark. Now, if you find that, okay, well, some of these describe it and some of these describe it, we're asking you to be honest and say the students should progress over time. We're asking you to choose the one where you think most accurately reflects primarily where they are. And if you're on the fence, grade down a little bit. And that's not to say that you should be aiming to grade lower on purpose, but just because we expect students to progress over time. If you're giving every student the benefit of the doubt every single time, you aren't really giving them space to progress. So that's why we're asking you to really look at all these categories and make sure that if you're giving the student these higher levels, that they really meet all of the criteria within here. And if they don't meet all the criteria, that's great. That gives them something to work on. We're hoping that they progress throughout the year and throughout the 18 months. And so if we don't give them room to progress, we really, again, aren't doing our students any service. A couple of you also have said that this category here, kind of the final high-level category, really is what you'd expect a facilitator to be. And the question was, well, how do we ever expect students to get here? This is what I'm supposed to do. And my answer to that is yes, that actually that's where we want. In 18 months, we are hoping that these students have mastered this material, or at least enough of them have mastered this, that they don't need us, that they don't need a facilitator. They can do all of the stuff that we're able to do on their own. Now, none of them should make it here ahead of time unless they've already completed a PhD in education and they've already gone through a health professions education in some respect. So there might be one student out of the entire class who kind of meets one of these categories. But again, in 18 months, this is where we're going. The hope is that students can independently lead without really our input at all. And that's where we're trying to progress them to. So on purpose, this is kind of unattainable at this point in their careers. And that's, again, by design. So that's a little about this assessment form, why it's a little bit more cumbersome. I think that we still have some work to do to kind of narrow down some of these categories, make them a little bit more specific, and definitely make them a little bit more user-friendly. Any thoughts or input you have about what specific changes you think should make, please put that in the feedback form on CBL. Again, we just can't answer all of these emails. We're getting tons of emails. But if you put that in the feedback form, we can actually look at it and then respond as we go through and make modifications. So that's a little bit about the feedback form itself. The final thing I'll address is just kind of this overall question about, well, I'm nervous because students look at 15% of their grade and they are expecting a high grade from CBL. And certainly, I think a lot of our students are used to getting high marks from participation. What we're hoping that CBL is more than participation. Just showing up doesn't really give you much other than to say you're present. What we're really wanting them to engage in the curriculum in a much more meaningful way. And so I think a lot of students are anxious about getting lower grades than they're used to in these types of formats. And for us as facilitators, we're a little bit anxious about giving lower grades than we're used to, because I think we're used to giving fairly high grades because it didn't have a big impact on their overall progression in medical school. So I want to reassure you that looking at the distribution, all the facilitators are doing an amazing job. And I'm going to pull up the distribution of grades here. So this is from the mid-module evaluation. And I want us to say that here's, again, this is the high end of grades and this is the very low end. And this low end is just barely passing. So very, very few students failed CBL. But we had a couple students who were just on the borderline. We had a couple students who were really incredible, kind of at the point of, being able to be facilitators. But the majority of students really fell into this C, B, and maybe kind of low A category. And I would say actually probably B plus here. So actually, based on the overall grading that all of you did, had an amazing distribution. I would say if this was a multiple choice exam, and I saw this distribution of grades where most people fell into the middle range and a couple of outliers, I would say that's a perfect exam. So to me, the fact that we have really strong grade distribution means that we are probably grading very accurately. That most of our students are doing well, but they aren't ready to move to clerkship yet. A couple of our students are struggling in small groups and they need to kind of be brought along. But I think what we're hoping for is that this distribution should move as we progress through the modules, but it shouldn't shift dramatically to the right in a couple weeks. So I hope this is reassuring for most of you that really the grades you put in were very accurate, and I think they are going to help the students quite a bit in their progression. Our hope, again, with CBL is that we are getting students clerkship ready. And in clerkships, a lot more of their grading, a lot more of how they're assessed is very subjective, is based on how their attendings evaluate them, how the residents evaluate them. And it's also very based on the comments they get back. And so those comments you put in are really important. But also, we want students to kind of move away from this objective, I take a test, if I do well, that means I succeed. Because that's just not how they're going to be. That's not how things are going to work in clerkships. That's certainly not how things are going to work in residency. So this is a culture shift for all of us. This is a big culture shift for the students. I would anticipate that you are going to get some students who are anxious about that. I would again encourage you, and we are going to do that on our end just to reassure the students that this is really part of their growth and learning, transitioning from being undergraduate students to medical students, and it should feel different. And so far, what we have back on data in terms of how the grades are being distributed and how the numbers are working out is that it seems to be very accurate. In general, groups have a good distribution as well. So facilitators within the group aren't just giving everyone hundreds and aren't just giving everyone 40s. We have some groups that are a little bit lower than others, but overall, I would say in general, by group and by specific facilitation grade, you actually are all pretty much in the same range. And you have a pretty similar spread over how you evaluate the student. So just looking at the numbers so far, things seem to be pretty accurate and going pretty well. We are, again, going to continue to crunch these numbers, especially the end of Module 1s, and have someone independent of CBL kind of look at them and validate that they think that this type of grading seems to be appropriate in terms of the distributions that you would expect. One other question that came up several times is just the translation of the actual milestone progression into numerical grades. And several requests, both from students and faculty, to understand how the specific milestones translate into numbers. Again, we really are trying to keep this on the back end because we want students to focus on how they're doing in the milestones. We do want to move the focus away from the specific grades to the milestones. And so it's not going to be possible. Students are still going to look at grades. They are going to look at what is my grade in CBL, and that is what they are going to continue to focus on in terms of what they think they're succeeding in. I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to convince them completely that the number is less important than how they're progressing. We have to put numbers to things at this point. We do not yet have a curriculum where we can have no grades. Someday, maybe. Someday, maybe we don't have to have any grading at all. We can just grade students along milestones and watch them progress. But for now, we are stuck with a little bit of we have to put some number to this. The number itself is really just a way for them to get entered into the overall module evaluation. The milestones, the progression is really what's important for them as learners. I don't know how else to emphasize this to students other than continue to encourage them to think about their progression in CBL as what's important and their interactions is important and not as much about where the numbers fall. And I'm really trying to de-emphasize the numbers as much as possible. I wish I could get rid of them completely, but we can't quite yet. So for those of you who ask, well, how do we explain this to the students? We told them that progression was going to be more important than the grades. And to me, my answer is still yes. Progression, how they are progressing in CBL is much more important than the number that comes out at the end. That's going to be true for the rest of their careers. How they progress and grow and learn as physicians is going to be more important for their patients and also more important for their own wellness than the actual number that they get. We're in lots of specialties, we have grades, right? We get evaluated by patients, we get Yelp reviews, and we can continue to get these surveys back that tell us how well we're doing. Ultimately, those numbers aren't very helpful in our own progression. We know that. So as a department, you might, if you're in the family medicine department or the internal medicine department or the emergency medicine department, you might get Press-Ganey scores back. Very rarely do those scores tell you anything useful about how you are doing as a physician. Sometimes the comments do, but very rarely do the numbers. And what we're trying to help students do is move away from focusing on just the number and actually focusing on what it is they're learning and how they're progressing. And so I'm going to ask you to continue to reinforce that, emphasize that to students, let them know that that's what matters, and that's what matters to you as a facilitator, and that's what really matters in their progression of CBL. The number is a necessary evil at this point, but really it is not the focus or the purpose of CBL. Several people have asked, should we grade up a little bit because the students are getting nervous? And I would just encourage you, and just based on this graph, to say, hey, whatever you were doing for the beginning of the module, it seems to be working really well. You aren't on your own either. We're asking you to make sure that before you finalize grades, that you talk to your co-facilitators. Having two of you there to kind of discuss each student really should hopefully balance any tendency for someone to go really high or really low on the grades. And we're really hoping that you continue to do that, continue to talk between facilitators, so that when you're giving students feedback, they're really getting feedback from two different people. And again, I think that helps to balance out any kind of wild swings or kind of tendencies to really grade too far on one side or the other. I hope that is helpful. Again, I'm sorry that was probably longer than I was planning. But I do want to just reassure you that you guys are doing an amazing job with CBL. I think even in the evaluations, you are far exceeding my hopes and our hopes when we designed CBL in terms of being really honest and helping the students truly critically assess where they are. It will really benefit them in the long run and make them better physicians. I am very confident of that. But it will be a little bit of a difficult transition. So I ask that you just bear with us. Help us through this, because already I think our students have gained so much from all the work that you've put into CBL. So thank you again, and have a great week.